Welcome back to Utah Studies. Today, we're learning about Chapter 6. Let's get into it. All right, Chapter 6 is called Their Faces Towards Hope. So let's just recap real quick. You have the land bridge theory, the original Paleo-Indians coming down into North and South America 15,000 years ago or so. You've got your prehistoric Indians. Then you have your historic Indians. Then you have your Spanish explorers. Then you have your mountain men. And now you're going to have your Mormon pioneers. And so we're just showing the different people coming into this region, which is not known as Utah yet, but it's about to be. Okay? So that's where we're at. Okay, to understand Utah history, you need to know about the Mormon pioneers. And to know about them, you need to go back to the Second Great Awakening. So in America, you know the Pilgrims. They had left the Church of England. They're basically separatists. They're living in the Netherlands. They don't like the way that their kids are growing up. They come to America to have religious freedom in their own their own church, okay? And you also have the Puritans who want to purify the Church of England, so they're over here for religious freedom. But then the religious fervor starts to die out. So then there's this Great Awakening. Then that starts to die out, and now there's this Second Great Awakening. And this is tied also into the Erie Canal a little bit, because when you trade ideas and products, you can trade. When you trade products, you can also trade ideas, and you can have communication. The Second Great Awakening happens around this New York area. They call it the Burned Over District. And it's because you have all this interconnectivity, compared to the internet. No, it's not interconnected, but for that day it was. And they start sharing these new religious ideas, and people start coming out to these big mass gatherings, and there's just a real religious fervor in the country. That is called the Second Great Awakening. Out of the Second Great Awakening, you get a lot of new denominations, okay? And one of them will be the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So let's get into who starts that. Joseph Smith, okay? You should know that. He's going to start this new church. They're going to have some friction with their neighbors, and they're just moving around the country a little bit, and then finally they say, we're going to leave the United States. We're going to go into this area out west. Spoiler alert, that area is Utah. Okay? It says right there, Journey for Religious Freedom. You don't have to know every spot per se. I'd rather you know why there's friction and what the outcome of the friction is, how they go to Utah. Okay? They don't just wake up in New York one morning and say, you know what, we're going to Utah. First off, there is no Utah at this point, but they're moving around, and then they have to get out west. Why? We'll talk about the extermination order and how that plays into it, okay? You see that that's underlined, so you're going to have to know that. And that's our primary source of the day. You're going to have to read it. It'll be attached to this video. It says there why the friction, okay, misunderstandings and conflict. We'll get into that a little bit more. And then the second leader of the church will be Brigham Young, and he is known as a great builder and colonizer of the West. And the book wants you to know that. So let's get going. Oh, great. Your test question. Perfect. You'll have a couple of multiple choice questions, but you'll definitely have an essay. Here is your essay. So make sure that you review this, that you're ready to go. It'll be a week or two. We'll just say a week, but it's probably like 10 days. The Spanish mountain men, the pioneers, they all come to Utah for different reasons. Discuss why each group comes to Utah. In a 5-paragraph essay, this thing writes itself. Introduction. Okay, talk about the Spanish. Next paragraph, mountain men. Next paragraph, pioneers. You could also do Native Americans, Spanish, English. You could divide this up a couple of different ways, but it'll write itself. It's already got the outline built into the question. You can thank me later. Quick review, what is manifest destiny? Exactly. The thought that we are going to go from sea, meaning the United States, should expand from sea to shining sea. We've taken over about half of what is considered the United States today, and we're just going to keep on growing until we hit the Pacific, okay? What was the old Spanish Trail? Now, we talked about this. Okay, it's a trading route between New Mexico and California. But don't forget that it gets built upon. You have Juan Rivera kind of doing the early recon, then Dominguez Escalante, and then you've got the old Spanish Trail. I just want you to see how this builds up. Then later the mountain men come in. You've got Hastings Cutoff. How will people find their way into Utah later on using Hastings Cutoff? I just want you to see how the knowledge of this region gets passed on to the next group, and then everybody benefits down the line. What's a mission? Spanish mission. What's it for? Okay, they're going to convert the Native Americans. Spanish priests want to convert the Native Americans to the Spanish way of life. Convert them religiously to Catholicism, teach them how to farm, teach them how to dress, teach them to speak Spanish, be Spanish, okay? And if you think your ethnicity, or I shouldn't say your culture, if you think your culture is the best culture, what's that word? Ethnocentricity, exactly. Okay, new words today. What's an exodus? It just means mass exit, okay? Big exit of people. What's Brigham Young known for? We just talked about it, colonizing, okay, the West. And why do the Mormon pioneers want to come to Utah? Well, we'll talk about that soon. So let's talk about this Second Great Awakening. There is no Netflix. There is no movie theater, okay? And so the big entertainment and, it's religion, it's entertainment, it's people coming together, it's boisterous, okay? And you hear about it. That's kind of how the Erie Canal plays into it, is that you can get all the, it's hard to communicate. It's hard to let 1,000 people know that this event is happening. But now they've got the Erie Canal and these roads and things, and people are able to talk and trade a little bit more, and you can get 1,000 people to know about a group. That doesn't mean 1,000 people show up. It just means that you can get a large number of people to go to these meetings, okay? So that's the Second Great Awakening. Here's the map of that burned over district that I talked about, upstate New York. And you can see a couple of the different denominations, and there's more than just this. Okay, Joseph Smith, and all of this comes from your book on page 98, if you want. Said he had received a vision from God at age 14, gets knowledge about these gold plates, and translates them into the Book of Mormon, okay? He wants his followers to go to a new gathering place, a new Zion, which will turn out to be Utah in the end. Here's a picture. They don't know if this is Joseph Smith, but you can read the description down there. It's from the Library of Congress, and it might be. Might not be. You tell me. Okay, so the Mormons are persecuted in New York, and then they're going to move to Ohio. Then later they're going to move to Missouri. Then they're going to move to Illinois. Then they're going to leave the United States, okay? So let's talk about the primary source, or let's read it first. So here we go. Take out your primary source, have a read, and then let's talk about it. Okay, so let's talk about your primary source. It says right there, Commander-in-Chief. Okay, he's the Commander-in-Chief of Missouri, right? So he's the governor. That's what I'm trying to say. And so that's Governor Boggs. And what does he say in there? Yeah, he says the Mormons must be treated as enemies and must be exterminated or driven from the state. Wow. Okay, very forceful. So you can see why the Mormon pioneers would want to find a new home, right? They're not welcome. Well, why is that? So now, I want you to open your book to page 100. We're going to read about the misunderstandings and the conflict between the Mormon pioneers and their neighbors. Okay, so welcome back. First off, religious people, sometimes different religions, or even in the same religion, if you think your way is right and the other person's way is wrong, then that causes friction. So this upsets the neighbors around them, all right? When they move as such a large group, they can outnumber their neighbors, especially when they move towards the west. Towns are real small. The further west you get, the further away from civilization, from the big towns. So you come in and now you can control things both economically or, as it says in the next, voted as a block in the election. you can come in and you can vote your own people in charge, and now everybody else has to go with that. Okay, they had a communal lifestyle that has pros and cons. They were against slavery, and in Missouri, we'll learn about later the Missouri Compromise. Slavery was a big deal, and the Mormon people are anti-slavery, and so that's going to cause friction with their neighbors. And then lastly, polygamy, which just means having multiple wives in this case, and their neighbors are not going to look favorably upon that at this time. Okay? I want to show you guys this map real quick. You can see where it's labeled 1, 2, 3, 4. The church members start off in New York, then they're going to Ohio, then they're down here to Independence, Missouri, and they're bouncing around in this region a little bit. And then they're number 6 over there is Nauvoo, Illinois. And that's where we're at now on the journey. So
within a 7-year period, the city was built and then largely abandoned. How and why it happened is the story of Old Nauvoo. The area had been home to early Indians and a few white settlers. Land speculators of the 1830s had projected a city for the site and called it Commerce, but the panic of 1837 stunted its growth. Lying low along the Mississippi, soggy in places from the high water table, Commerce was unhealthy during mosquito season. Early in 1839, several thousand members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints arrived in western Illinois. They were not ordinary settlers, but refugees fleeing religious persecution in Missouri. With their leader, Joseph Smith, they hoped to build a city where they could live and prosper in peace. In the spring, they cleared the land and drained the swamps. They gave the place a new, more optimistic name, Nauvoo, a Hebrew word implying beauty, peace, and rest. Before the summer was over, the land had been surveyed and the city laid out. There were broad streets and large private lots. By the end of the first year, it was a big, unfinished town. It was getting bigger every day. Neighboring settlements claimed Nauvoo was growing like a mushroom. By 1844, the old sources of friction kindled new antagonism. Joseph Smith, his brother Hiram, and other members of the city council left Nauvoo for Carthage, the county seat. They went of their own free will to answer charges raised against them. June 27th was a day of tragedy. Joseph and Hiram were killed by an angry mob. A rift had been wedged open in Hancock County. The majority of the citizens rallied to the leadership of Brigham Young. Nauvoo continued to grow, but leaders of the church were urged to leave the state. Early in February 1846, the first group of Latter-day Saints left Nauvoo to begin the journey west. They were to cross 1,000 miles of wilderness to find a new home in the Rocky Mountains. By September, Nauvoo was virtually empty.
when they go to Nauvoo, they get this swampland, and they establish a city, and it becomes a large, successful town. And one thing I want you to understand is that this will be a theme. They get the land that nobody wants because it's not considered good enough to inhabit. And then they turn it into a pretty decent, awesome city. That's what's going to happen later with Salt Lake City, only instead of it being a swamp, it's going to be a desert. But it's like the same movie. It's the same movie, but they just kind of flipped it around. Okay, so you can read about this on page 101 in your book. But to sum it up, the There's some disagreements about what's being printed by the newspaper. They destroy the printing press. The neighbors are already there's already friction with the neighbors. And this was a tipping point. Oh, you destroyed the printing press. You don't like free speech. Joseph Smith is going to end up, and his brother are going to end up killed in the jail, okay, by a mob. Okay, so please read the rest of that on page 101. Now, this decree goes out. Let's read it together and then let's talk about it. To the members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, our pioneers are instructed to proceed west until they find a good place to make a crop in some good valley in the neighborhood of the Rocky Mountains, where they will infringe upon no one and be not likely to be infringed upon. Okay. Does this sound like they're headed to Utah? Kind of. They're going west. They're going near the Rocky Mountains. They want to find a valley that they can plant crops, but they don't exactly know where they're going to head. They're just, listen, we're out of here. We can't stay here. We're heading west, okay? Why do they want to come to Utah now? Why do the Mormon pioneers want to come to Utah? Okay, to get away from the friction of their neighbors, to not live in conflict with the people around them. And then here we go. We're going to talk next time about winter quarters, which you can see here on the map is number 8. Okay, what's an exodus? A mass exit. Okay, they're exiting. Okay, they're going to go to Mexico. So Brigham Young becomes the leader after Joseph Smith. He leads the exodus out of the United States. I'll show you that on a map in a second. He establishes a lot of settlements in the West. They want you to know builder and colonizer. There's an arrow. The arrow's bigger. Now it's giant. You better, that's an easy quiz question, right? Here's the map of the United States at this time period. So you can see where the Great Salt Lake is over here. This is not the United States. They are leaving the United States and they are moving to Mexico. So we'll talk more about that in the second half of chapter 6. Take care.